Salve omnes, and welcome back to Caesar Book 5. In this video, we're going to be going through Chapter 44 and just Chapter 44 because this one is a doozy. But before we get into that, as always, let's take a look at our color coding and review what it all means. Words indicated in red are going to be our subjects. Anything indicated in green is a verb. And any word indicated in blue, which we don't have here, is a direct object. Likewise, words in boldface type are the main clause or thought of each sentence, and anything in normal, non-bolded type is subordinate to that main thought in some way. So, with that out of the way, let's do this. So, Chapter 44 of Caesar Book 5 exists in the larger context of Cicero and his legion fighting off the attack by the Nervii and their allies. But at the same time, Chapter 44 here stands alone as a little vignette within the larger story. Because as we can see right here, Caesar is pulling away from the large view, right, the broader view of the legion fighting against the Gauls, and is choosing to focus on these two men, Titus Pullo and Lucius Vorenos. They are quite the pair. So much so, in fact, that if you have watched the HBO series Rome, which you should, at least the first season, assuming that you are old enough, you will notice that these two men show up, Pullo and Vorenus. They in fact show up as more or less kind of the main characters of the story. Certainly the characters through whose eyes or through whose viewpoint we as the audience are expected to latch on to the story and follow the more important and sort of greater characters such as Caesar, etc. So let's go in and find out who these guys are, what they did that has made them so famous. So we start right off here at the beginning of Chapter 44 with erant, and as we know, when sum esse starts a sentence in Latin, we tend to understand it as there is. So in this case, imperfect tense, there were, in this legion, Cicero's legion, fortissimi viri, centuriones, qui primis ordinibus appropinquarent, and then we get their names. So we know that they are extremely brave men. They are centurions, and this phrase right here gives us a sense of where they are in things. So this idea here is that they were approaching the front of the ranks. So if we think about a Roman legion, okay, the soldiers are arrayed in lines, right, and in columns. And in order to facilitate things so that we didn't, the Romans didn't lose men unnecessarily, every now and then the men in the front would rotate back. All right, they would step back and allow the soldiers behind them to step up and take over their position in the very front where the fighting was most fierce. So this phrase right here indicates that these centurions were literally just getting to the point where they were going to be in the first rank of troops where the fighting was thickest. All right, so they were getting very close to that. They were approaching that first rank, Pullo and Vorenus. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about what their relationship is like. That's what this sentence has to deal with. So he, that would be Pullo and Vorenus, perpetuas inter se controversias habebant. So they had, right, habebant, something like continual or unending rivalries. All right, we're gonna want to translate this word carefully. Not arguments, not disputes, but they're in competition with each other, but they're also on the same side. So we're going to say rivalries here between each other. Right, se is of course plural because the reflexive pronoun looks back to the subject, which is they. And then this expression right here, this is an indirect question that stands in apposition to the controversias. What is their rivalry? The rivalry is explained by the indirect question, who should be held first, or who should be preferred? So their rivalry is about who is better. All right, that's what we would say in English, who is better. And so, omnibus quae annis, every year, yes, it's plural, but it's an ablative of time when, so the idea here is year after year, de locis summis. Now, this idea of locis summis is not like a place in the physical world, but it's about status among the legion. The highest places, okay, so the idea is promotions, honors, glory, right? It goes back to the idea of who should be considered to be the best. They were contending, or they were, competing with each other in this, in these simultatibus, in these rivalries. Okay, it's plural, but if you really wanted to, you could probably wind up translating it singular. Okay, simultatibus is in, translated as in. Okay, this use of the ablative here is an ablative of respect. So they were striving about the top spot in rivalries with respect to their feud, right? Because their feud is about who is the best. Okay, so ex his, that would be sort of between them or from them, right? The two of them, Pulo and Vorenos. Pulo, cum acerrimad munitiones pugnaretur. This is when, just a simple when, even though, the verb here is subjunctive, so all options are available, but when the fighting was most fierce at the fortifications. So once again here with pugnaretur, we are seeing this passive verb form being deployed in an impersonal construction by Caesar. So we could say something like, when they were fighting most fiercely near the fortifications or at the fortifications. But since this is being used as an impersonal, we could also say something like, when the fighting was most fierce. All right, and the odd here, it just means at. Okay, so Pulo notices that they're in the thick of it. So Pulo calls out to Vorenos here, and we see this this direct speech, not something we see a lot in Caesar with inquit. He says, "Oh, Vorenos," essentially, sort of, what are you waiting for, right? Now you could, and it's perfectly fine if you want to, read this quid as the interrogative why. Why do you hesitate? And that's fine. If you read it that way, obviously quid is not going to be construed as the object of dubitas. So, read it as why if you like. It doesn't have to be rendered as an object. Why are you hesitating? What are you uncertain of? And then he continues on, or, he says, and this is another interrogative right here because we see that it's a question, so this is an interrogative. What place, now in this context we would probably say opportunity, right? But a locum is a place. What opportunity for proving your courage or excellence? Now, probandi, of course, is a gerundive. We see that because it is modifying virtutis, tuae virtutis. So literally, what place of your courage which must be demonstrated? Something like that would be the literal translation with this gerundive, but we do the standard sort of gerundive gerund flip, and we read probandi, of demonstrating your courage. What opportunity for demonstrating your courage are you waiting for? Are you expecting? Hic dies, this day, he says, concerning our rivalries, right? Again, we're translating controversias kind of in a friendly manner, will be the judge. So this day will be the judge of our rivalries. So let's not waste this opportunity. Let's go decide who is actually the best. And so, haec cum dixiset, is very simple and straightforward. When he had said these things, this is Pulo still, he proceeded beyond the fortification. So Pulo has gone beyond the defenses of the camp at this point. And, now for this part we'll start here with irrumpit. He burst into, we would say, because irrumpit, right? So we see that the prefix on this word is in. So that's how we can understand burst into. And then the in prefix here is going to help us get to quaque pars, because we would say in English, he burst into whatever part or that part of the enemy. But the Latin doesn't require that. It can just go straight to quaque pars. He burst into whatever part of the enemy seemed, right, est visa, and then confertissima here is standing as a nominative in apposition to pars. All right, and yes, in a sense, there is basically kind of an essay missing. All right, but est visa by itself, when video is used passively like this, it functions as almost a copula, right? So a linking verb, which is why basically that is to say it's almost like just esse, but it's not exactly like esse because it means seems to be. So that's why confertissima is nominative modifying pars. It's the predicate. So he burst into whatever part of the enemy seemed most densely packed. Something like that, right? Most crowded. All right, now we see how Vorenos responds to this. Again, we've seen this many times now in chapter 5, ne quidem, emphasizing the word in the middle. So, oh, indeed, Vorenos did not hold himself, right? Continet sese. So, stay. He did not hold himself. Now, because of continet sese, we know that this wallow here is in wallow. So, ablative of place where, within the wall or at the wall, something like that, right? Vorenos did not hold himself there then, right? Don't forget the tomb, then, but veritus existimationem omnium. This participle here, this is a deponent verb, verior, which is why this participle is active and actually takes an object, existimationem. He feared the opinion of everyone. And so, fearing the opinion of everyone, he followed. He followed Pulo. So, peer pressure works, kids. All right, so now we're going to get into the actual fighting. So we start off with an ablative absolute, mediocri spatio relicto. Now, on the surface, this phrase, mediocri spatio relicto, might seem to just say something as simple as with a modest space being left. But this phrase is a bit of an idiom. The sense of it here is it's actually temporal. So we would say in English, after a short time had passed, a moment later, something to that effect. So it's not actually talking about space in the physical sense. It's talking about the span of time. Only a small span of time had been left, so had passed. And then what happened, right? It didn't take very long because the enemy, of course, is right there. They're confertissima. They're very thickly packed. Pulo hurls a spear at the enemy. Remember that when we're attacking people, we always use in as a prefix, not ad, okay? Because we want to pierce our enemy and kill them, not just go up close to them and try to frighten them off. And he pierced one from the multitude. So this ex multitude, now you can read it, he pierced one from the crowd, or he pierced one who was running forth from the crowd. Right? It kind of depends on how you want to understand it. The point is that he speared somebody, and he killed him. Right? Notice the two ablative absolutes in quick succession. This man, again, we're seeing quo here. This is really hoc. Okay, this guy that Pulo struck was struck and killed. Percusso, that's the striking, and ex animato, his soul departed. Now, notice the very quick subject change here to the enemy with no indication, right? Protegunt, coniciunt, and dant, with no indication of a nominative. It's just understood because things are happening very quickly. So we need to follow the verbs. They, the enemy, protected him. Who's the him? The dead guy. Okay? They protected him with their shields, right? Ablative of means. And then as one, this is the only nominative we get that indicates it's they now. As one, they hurl their weapons at their enemy. This enemy, of course, is Pulo. and they do not give the opportunity of retreating. And then we understand sort of an illy or a puloni, right, to him. So they don't give him an opportunity to retreat. This, of course, here, regrediendi, right here, is a gerund with facultatem, the opportunity, genitive, right, the opportunity of backing away. Okay, and then we go on to the next sentence where we see that things are actually really bad for Pulo. The shield for Pulo. Now, this dative here, Puloni, is either a dative of possession or a dative of interest. Functionally, there is not a world of difference between those two datives. So a dative of possession, a dative of interest are almost the same thing. It doesn't really matter. The point is that we understand it as if it were almost a genitive. Pulo's shield, right? Literally the shield for Pulo, but just colloquially, Pulo's shield. So what happened to his shield? It was pierced, transfigitur. And the verutum, now this is actually the spear. You won't see this word again terribly often unless you read a lot of military treatises in Latin. Mostly you'll see hasta. But a verutum is something like a javelin, so it's a light spear as opposed to a hasta, which is a hasta or a pilum, which is a little heavier. So the spear, it's a spear. The spear in his sword belt is stuck, all right, or is snagged, something like that. That's a result of it piercing his shield. And now we see that this has a consequence. Hic casus, this misfortune. This phrase, hic casus, is referring to the piercing of the shield and the sticking by the javelin in his sword belt. What did it do? It turned aside his sheath, vaginam, right? It turned aside his sheath. And now, this gets a little fancy here. We got to hold on here because we have this konanti. This present active participle is going to be really important once we get to it in sense. It's going to it's referring to Pulo, all right, in the dative, Puloni. But we're not there yet, so let's hang on to this for 1 second and go down to dextra moratur manum. This misfortune, the spear getting stuck in his sword belt, turned aside his sheath and delays his right hand, or the right hand. And again, just like we saw in the previous sentence where Puloni was either a dative of possession or interest, we're kind of in the same situation here. It delayed the right hand for the one, but we would just say of the one, as if it were genitive, but it isn't. That would be Pulo, who was trying to draw his sword. So Pulo's trying to draw his sword, but he can't because the misfortune has turned aside or knocked aside his sheath. So he can't get to his sword. So it delays his right hand and thus impeded, this is Pulo now in the accusative, the enemies surround him. All right, the enemies surround the one who is impeded. But fear not, succurrit. Notice, so the verb is in the primary position, right? First word of the sentence, and it's one of these sub-prefixed verbs. So we know straight away that help is coming, and only then do we find out that help is coming from a rather unlikely source, his enemy. Now, this use of the word inimicus here is kind of like controversias from before, controversiae. We're going to want to read this a little bit more friendly. Vorenos is not Pulo's enemy, but at the same time he kind of is because he's his rival. All right, so I would suggest translating these words, like controversias is a rivalry, and inimicus here Vorenos is not his enemy, but he is his rival. So his rival Vorenos ran to him, and we remember that sub means to bring aid. It conveys that sense when it's used as a prefix. And he came to aid, same basic idea. Pulo, dative, because both these verbs, by the way, are taking these dative objects, illi and laboranti, which is puloni, pulo, because they are prefixed. All right, they're compound verbs, and so they want a dative object, not an accusative object. So Vorenus, his rival, brought aid to him, and he came to help Pulo, who was struggling, we might say, to get this present active participle in laboranti. Okay, so now though, now that Vorenus shows up, to him, now we have to be careful because there's a lot of people here. There's the enemy, there's Pulo, and there's Vorenus. And Latin pronouns like hic and ille and whatnot will change their meaning based on context. So contextually, the last person we were talking about was Vorenus. So when we see hunc, we know that that refers to Vorenus. So to Vorenus, and then we have to come down here to find out who our subject is. It's the entire crowd, so therefore it's the enemy. The enemy turn themselves. So they turn around, right? This reflexive verb in Latin just means to turn around. So they turned around immediately, confestim, the adverb, immediately from Pulo. So they turn away from Pulo immediately to Vorenus. They turn to face Vorenus. Why did they do this? All right, this will prove to be a mistake. Why did they do this? Well, arbitrantur, they thought, okay, and then of course we know what's happening. We're going into indirect speech, oratio obliqua. They thought that illum, this would be Pulo, because we already have hunc as Vorenus, so therefore illum has to be Pulo. They thought that he, ocisum esse, the esse is missing, had been killed by the spear, or with the spear. Okay, so now, how does Vorenus handle this? Well, gladio, with his sword, cominus. Now, this word cominus is an adverb, and it means something like at close quarters, or, hand-to-hand, like combat, hand-to-hand combat, in hand-to-hand combat. Literally, the expression here is kind of vague. Vorenus, he did the thing, right? So he carried on the thing with his sword at close quarters. So we understand from the context here, he fought, right? He fought the enemy with his sword at close quarters. And un interfecto, simple ablative absolute, dead simple, after one of them was killed, the reliquos, the rest of them, paulum propellit. He pushed them back a little bit. This paulum, we will remember that we've seen this before. This neuter accusative singular looking adjective being used again here adverbially. He pushed them back a little ways. But dum cupidius instat, while he presses forward, this is a comparative adverb, cupidius, rather or more eagerly. Or you can almost say too eagerly, right? Too with two O's. Too eagerly. What does he do? Into a place that is inferiorum, so into a lower spot, into a depression in the ground, having fallen, dejectus, having slipped, he concidit, he fell. So he took a bad step into a lower spot or a hole in the grass, in the dirt, and he fell to the ground. But fear not, because to him, now again, who were we just talking about? We were talking about Vorenus. So huic is Vorenus. Dative case here, to him, rursus. Now, rursus usually means again or over again or a second time, but in context it means something more like in return. Okay? To him in turn, being surrounded. This circumvento here is dative going with huic. So Vorenus, to Vorenus who was surrounded, Pulo brought aid. And so thus we see the dative here, huic circumvento, is just a simple indirect object. Pulo brought aid. And the both of them, so now they're working together. The both of them unharmed, with many enemies having been killed, simple ablative absolute, summa cum laude, the manner, with the greatest praise, they recover themselves, or they take themselves back within the fortifications. So they make their way back to the safety of the camp. And so here we are at the end. Thus, Fortune. Thus, Fortune, okay, in their contentione et certamine, in their rivalry and struggle, or, contest, right? A certamen is a contest or a competition. Utrumque versavit. Fortune basically sort of visited both of them, or engaged both of them, something like that. Ut. Now, this ut clause, we know straight away, is a result clause. How do we know that? Because the seek in the main clause signals to us that we might expect a result clause. And sure enough, we get one. All right. Fortune visited both men such that, seek ut, with the result that, and then Caesar absolutely indulges his literary side here with this lovely parallel structure with these datives and these pronouns, alter, alteri, uter, utri. It's just wonderful. All right. So what is the result? The one, the rival to the other, this dative alteri goes with inimicus, and alter means one of two. So we don't actually know to whom it's specifically referring, which is great. It could be Pullo, it could be Vorenus. It doesn't matter. Each of them, we could say, each of them, the rival to the other one, was, and then we get these datives here, auxilio and saluti, of purpose, was at hand, was present, was there to be a help and safety. And it was not possible to judge, or to be judged if you like, that's fine. It was not possible to be discerned uter, and then this whole phrase goes here, and you can see how it clearly mimics the passage above, the phrase above. It could not be decided which should be preferred to the other. That's utri, that's that dative. Virtute, ablative of respect, in respect to courage. It was not possible to judge, and then of course we'll throw the widerrenter in, right? It was not possible to judge which of them seemed to be better, we might say, or seemed like he should be considered the best, compared to the other, utri, in respect to courage. They wound up helping each other, and it was actually impossible to tell who was in fact the better soldier. So much for that. Maybe Pullo and Vorenus kept on having these competitions. Who's to say? All right. Well, with that out of the way, maximus gratias vobis omnibus for reading through this. We'll be picking up in the next video with, again, 2 chapters at a time, 45 and 46, rejoining the main flow of the story and seeing if Cicero and his men are able to get out of this alive. Valete omnes.